Today we are covering At Tikhons, aka the Hidden Secret Chapter from Demons by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So, if you didn't know, Crypto here, he's only read parts 1 and part 2 and At Tikhons. So that's going to be his knowledge base for discussing this. I'll have read the whole book, but I'm going to hold back on spoilers because we'll have a whole section dedicated to part 3, which will include the discussion of At Tikhons if something were to come up from this section to discuss.
Have you been looking forward to the Tikhons chapter in our discussion more than anything else?
Yeah.
Or just the end of the book? Okay.
No, I have been looking forward to this because what's so interesting about this, and especially reading it out of place, is this is the centerpiece of the book to me. This is everything when it comes to the I don't want to say wrestling Stavrogin, because to understand Stavrogin is probably a lost art. Like, we don't have Dostoevsky to ask questions to anymore. But I think it's that search, right? Like that desire to understand him is the most rewarding journey, right? Like, it's a journey before destination discussion. And this is that chapter. This is that chapter that is the infamous Napoleonic Man, or the infamous Grand Inquisitor from Brothers K. The At Tikhons is that chapter for me, and it's so sad that it was never released with the book during his lifetime.
Yeah, so I guess I ask you the question of, do you feel like it did me a service reading it out of place? Because I read the 10, and then I read this chapter afterwards in order to, fill out my knowledge base. And I don't know how I would have felt had I had that chapter inserted in there. Because you did, right? You read all 11 chapters when you first read this.
Yeah, but there's not like a ton of crazy Stavrogin things that happen in 9 and 10. It's really the part 3 prep that I think that matters. And even then, like, when you read the In Place 9, like the part that didn't get edited, it just says, like, literally in the PVR and Volhansky translation, it just starts with "meanwhile." Like, that's how we transitioned from where Stavrogin was leaving, is just like, I don't know if I'm a part of your organization, and Piotr's like, "You're beautiful, I love you, please." And then instead of having this crazy backstory to Stavrogin, it just goes, "meanwhile."
Yeah, it's a little bit almost disheartening. But so I guess one of the things that the point of this video, beyond our discussion, is how would you suggest, being that you've read it a specific way and you've read the entirety of the novel, unlike me, how would you suggest a reader read it?
It's the age-old argument of if the original intent of the artist could not be realized, right? Because the Mikhail Katkov, like his editor at the Russian Messenger, refused to publish this. He said that this is an effrontery to the Russian soul, to the Russian morality, right? And what does that mean, that this chapter isn't fit for the Russian standards of what's right and wrong, right? So the fact that it could never be inserted, and the fact that he never was able, even in his lifetime, to get it included in the book, some people view it as like, well, you should just read it as is published. Artists can't always achieve their end vision. It's sometimes hard to craft the perfect part. It's almost impossible to craft the perfect book. To me, I would like to honor what is the spirit of the book than the actualization of the book. And to me, that's including that. I think you can either include it at the end of part 2 or in space of as chapter 8, as opposed to it being, spit later on. I think reading it in line in 2 brought more rewarding elements to 3, but that's a sample size of 1. I can never go back and read 3 without that knowledge, but I will say, it added a lot. I was constantly thinking about what this chapter meant through 3. That's how powerful this chapter was for the challenge of understanding a character like Stavrogin.
All right, well, let's get into it then.
So we are inserted to the night after him walking out of that event about Will You Inform? And that night, he can't sleep. Nikolai can't sleep. So he heads out to the monastery where, if you remember, there's a chapter earlier where they're like, you should go talk to Tikhon. And he finally asks for Tikhon. And you'd almost expect like a Father Zosimov, like a well-respected, perfect man that can influence our religious life. No, that's not what we get, is it?
You get like a bum. That's how I imagined him.
Well, he's not well respected, and particularly for the time when you start talking about nerve pain or physical ailments, this was a time where some people still viewed that as punishment from God, that you did something wrong, even that you deserved some type of suffering in life.
Yeah, exactly. That you were did something bad in a previous life or whatnot. Yeah.
So we meet Tikhon, and he's just like, oh yeah, your mom, she stopped by like once a month. And I think I remember you.
Wait, what?
Yeah. And he's like, I've heard about your crazy brain rumors. Welcome. And here's where we kind of talk about those 3 B's, right? Like the behaviors of going to church, of being in the community that a lot of Russian Orthodox have. It's more than just being in a religion. It's belonging somewhere, right? And same with Tikhon. He does belong at this monastery, even if he is the outcast, the social... he doesn't fit the social milieu that you think of when it comes to a lot of traditional priests.
Right, exactly. So is he set up to be this way so he's more relatable to Starchovin, so that they can connect and have this conversation, and that Starchovin will divulge all the information that out to, because he has like diarrhea of the mouth and just gives up his whole, he confesses all of his sins basically, and I feel like that's like the only point.
Let's break it down step by step, right? Because why, and I don't know the answer to this, why would he go to a priest? He's seeing demons. He's seeing hallucinations. And even Tikhon himself's like, yeah, you should see a doctor. But he comes to see the priest. Why?
Well, the time period, if you are seeing demons, then it must be something related to the divine. So he's going to a priest for confession or help, to think that possibly the way that the cure is through the church.
Well, if you believe it's true, but he's an atheist. He's a materialist. He's the wild man that has been seeing women and inviting people over.
Is he?
Well, that's how he's positioned, right? At least in the beginning or in the backstory.
Right, but if someone is trying to explain the unexplainable, where's the first place they always go? They go to the place that has the unexplainable, the miracles, the God, the divine. That's where he's going.
So let's talk about some of his actions, because he, in this letter to our earlier discussions of him being this enigmatic, charming, scary character, we finally get some introspection. This is what we've missed, and why I think this is a really important part in part 2, is to finally see this character and know he's not the hero too at that.
Oh yeah, very far from the hero.
So the women, right? We start this letter, we get the introspection. He invites women over. Here I'm seeing this chickadee badoo who's married. Here I'm seeing this baby boo over here who's a maid. and I've got this great plan of hooking us all up for this party just so I can have some popcorn and sip my whiskey and watch these chicks go at it. What?
Wait. Yeah, that's what was heartbreaking once I started reading this, is I feel like it's almost a disservice. Like the editor, I know that he's trying to save the modesty of Russians or whatever, but it feels so real now that to get perspective, and it humanizes Stravogin. It gives him, it makes him a terrible person, but it gives him a quality of understanding, I think, for the rest of the characters. I mean, they don't know what he's done, obviously, but as, an omnipresent reader, now I do, and I can understand why he's behaving the way he is, why he's having the interactions the way he's having them, the way he discusses what he's doing, and why he seems to be listless through much of the book so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's broken almost, right? Because
yes,
you use the word he's humanized here, right? Which some people are like, wait, what does he mean by that, right? Like some people might have had that reaction when you said that. because he humanizes himself through the dehumane acts that he does with these women. Because if he truly believes that he is making the laws of what's right and wrong for his life, he should be able to mess with these chicks and find it hilarious and do what he wants if that's what he thinks is right for him. If that's what he is, if he's the one writing on his own heart what morality means. But right? So it's almost like, if we look at the author Dostoevsky, he took a personal affront when you wrote your own morality, right? Like we know that he viewed submissiveness, which is a Christian ideal in terms of the submissiveness to God, in terms of accepting the laws of God. Like that's a lifelong Christian struggle that, like many Christians, you're meant to sin, you're meant to fall, right? Like it's really hard to live that life. And here's Stavrogin, who's like, nope, no, that's a lie. I can write my own ones. So is he doing these acts to prove that God's law is not written on his heart? Is he doing it as the middle finger to the ultimate middle finger to a person like Dostoevsky, who's like, how can you not belong to the Russian Orthodox Church? Don't you know and feel that that's wrong? He's like, no, I'm going to do this and I won't feel remorse. Oh, crap. Maybe he does feel remorse.
Yeah, I guess this is the chapter that really feels to me, as you said, at the heart of the book. Take out the politics, take out the scheming, the culture, take out the class divide, everything. It comes down to morality. Can you have morality without religion? And I think that this is the character that embodies that for me reading it through the eyes of Dostoevsky, that you cannot. That if you do not have religion, you don't have morality, and as a result, Stavrogin is the result of that.
Yeah, and I know that this is a very personal subject for a lot of people that some people struggle with understanding, right? Because you have that famous quote, "Without God, everything's permissible," right? And it's Dostoevsky isn't saying you can't. It's not that you can't be moral without God. I don't think that he's saying that. But I think, in my view, is he's saying, where do you get your source of right and wrong, and how do you cohesively, as a community, as a nation, define that? Don't get me wrong, right? Like you and I have both read like The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. There's lots of arguments for where our morality and does universal morality exist. But to your point about Dostoevsky's attack here, he is trying to posit that question of how do you get that to work for a society? Because you see how he causes direct harm for these women, but also we got to move on to our girl, 14-year-old Matrosha. I wrote Matrosha, but isn't it Matroshka? Maybe it's a translation problem I have. Well, I may use both terms to describe her here.
I want to, real quick. I think that is he defending it, or is he testing morality through Stavrogin? Is the way that I kind of think of this as he's going through the course of events, and I think that's a very important distinction of testing what does it mean to be moral and defending one's morality through religion. I just want to throw that out there. But go ahead.
That's fair. Well, it's kind of like the I'm going to dumb it down even more. That raptor scene with Jurassic Park? That's Stavrogin. That's Stavrogin, where he's testing the fence, right? Like let's imagine you're in this bubble called society. That's not a hard stretch of the imagination. He's pushing the boundaries of what we consider morality to see what breaks, to see what seeds of disruption he can cause.
And I guess as from an editor's perspective in 19th century Russia, I guess I could see him in this chapter doing more than just slightly pushing or, nudging against those boundaries. He shattered them, because as you're going to move into the next part of the story of what happens with the young lady, the very young lady.
It's even slow into that because remember, it started with that penknife where he kind of like misplaced it and he eventually kind of knew where it was, but he blames her, where he has her mother, the landlady, just beat her. And he does it so he can watch her be beaten, because, you know, this is kind of like the assault on, you know, Dostoevsky being very biblical, knows religion well. The Matthew 18:6, I think, is kind of important for both this scene and the next scene with this little girl, of the assault on the young child is the ultimate effrontery to God, right? He specifically writes how those that cause harm to these children shall be hung, drowned at sea, et cetera, et cetera. It's the idea that you can't pervert innocence unless you become pure evil yourself.
Yeah, perverting innocence. That's what was literally on my mind. And I was going to say is that's how he gets you. That's how I think that Dostoevsky ropes you in almost to his side. And I hate to phrase it that way, but that what he's trying to say is, without God and religion, this is what could happen, possibly happen.
Let me read you a material quote. Let's dive right into this. It says, "It was not meanness that I loved. Here my reason was completely sound, but I liked the intoxication from the tormenting awareness of my baseness. In the same way, each time I stood at the barrier, waiting for my adversary to shoot, I felt the same shameful and violent sensation, and once extraordinarily strongly." This was a light bulb moment for me, right? It's not the evil and the baseness, it's that intoxication that he gets from knowing he's attacking the fence of Russian morality.
Is he, though? I mean, you're doing it for pleasure's sake. It seems selfish. It doesn't seem like he is giving the finger to Russia. He's just doing it because it makes him feel good.
Well, he gets a kick not from the output, from the process, right? If you look at the women like Lizaveta, Daria, Maria, what happens in Switzerland stays in Switzerland, right?
Oh my gosh, I knew you were going to bring it up eventually.
he toys with them, he messes with them, then he moves on to Count K, his friend Shatov, Maria, you know, where's my Prince Harry? All of these things are people that, is he a psychopath? Does he not feel anything for them in the way that he uses and abuses them? He doesn't get pleasure from the output. He gets pleasure from the process, from the pushing of the boundaries. And I think the reason why, this is a Una specific statement of what I took from the novel. The pleasure comes from pushing the boundaries of God's law, because the more he breaks it and gets away with it, the more that validates that he's right.
See, I would argue that he doesn't even believe in God if he's a true atheist, so why would that be relevant at all? It's not. And that's what makes him such a complex character, is he's just diving into his own selfish pleasure and needs, and to be damned with God is what he is saying, because he doesn't believe in him. But he sure as heck is now scared of it a little bit, because he's having these visions, and where's the first place that he turns back to? That's what makes him such a complicated character, and why I feel like this chapter needs to be in the part 2 in order to fully realize this character. And it's such a disservice not to be in there. And I'm glad that you made me read it the way I did, because it makes it that much more poignant. But I think that it's a push and pull. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer.
Well, it's all up to interpretation, right?
Of course. Yeah, always.
Because we didn't even talk about how he starts kissing this little girl, and eventually it moves beyond that. And it becomes abusive to the point of this is, I think, the part where it's like, we can't print this, right? Yep. And the little girl her innocence is gone. And she's broken from it. She's sick. She starts to retract from society. Her joy has been taken from her by an adult.
Stolen.
Right?
Stolen.
It's the Matthew 18:6, right? And he wants to watch, because then he knows that he's right, because he's writing his own heart. He's, from Nietzsche's mind of will to power, he has the master mentality of being able to decide what's right and wrong from a morality perspective. But that's not what happens. I think he starts to realize that he's a slave, because there is something universally wrong about this perversion. There is something universally bad that you will get beaten up. You will be, people will easily step out of the law of what's right and wrong to hurt you if they find out you do that activity. And that's Stavrogin's revelation, is that he starts to realize I did wrong, right? And I think, to me, we've talked before about the structure of tragedy. When we talk about mimesis, when we talk about anagnorisis, when we talk about hamartia, mimesis being, does this represent reality? Is this representative of real life? I think we've made that case pretty clear, where this is Russian society. This is clearly a Orthodox Christian, heavily Russian Orthodox society in terms of what's right and wrong, right? To the point where they're in the state, passing laws, the patriarch, a lot of control as to what kind of happens in Russian society, right?
Right.
No question there about, from a Mises standpoint, does this book reflect reality, right? And then hamartia, do you remember what that word means?
No, sir.
You can almost just replace it with the word hubris, and it's pretty much accurate a lot of the times. It's the downfall of the character that had a belief in something, but that belief wasn't right? So what is, and it's up to interpretation, and I guess this is a good question for the audience to chime in if you disagree. What do you think was Stavrogin's downfall? What was his miscalculation?
I know for me personally, I think that it was, he thought he was better than what he believed to be his social norm, because from his perspective, he is an atheist. So if he truly does not believe in a god, then that's not it, but it's his fellow Russians. And I guess he's going so low into depravity, I guess, to feel. And when he finally gets there, he has the revelation that he is wrong. And I think it comes back to a core human nature of breaking innocence. And maybe not so much just breaking of innocence or perverting of innocence, the pollution of the youth. It's that it is that youth. That's the core mechanic of it, is because that's the perpetualness of our species. That's how we move forward into the future, is our young. And I mean, those that are like him in even our modern day society are shunned by other criminals. That's the lowest of the low. So I don't know. Maybe he was trying to find the point where is his soul? Will God punish him at a certain point? Will this come back to haunt him? That seems to be his reconcile of the pushing forward of those boundaries, which is just heartbreaking, because you've definitely not grown, I think, to love this character at this point in the book, with or without this, definitely without this chapter, but this definitely takes your perspective of him to a negative point that is irreparable.
Well, you're starting to move kind of like into the anagnorisis, right? Like the light bulb moment. So
yeah.
For me, the hamartia is his miscalculation, is his belief that he could live without, society's morals or God's morals, that he could create his own, in a sense. Again, right. my own personal experience. The real purpose of hamartia is, how does this explain to the consumer, to the reader, that reader pity, that reader feeling of compassion? Because what's going to ultimately happen is that anagnorisis, which is the light bulb moment to realize that you're wrong, your downfall. Right. And to me, I think the downfall is literally this scene with this little girl where he's listening to her taking the end of her life, where the hanging is happening. And the fact that he listens for it is very critical for me. And I don't think it's because, again, some people read it as he's looking for that pleasure, or that he's looking for the validation that he's right. To me, I think it's his realization that he's wrong, because after this, he becomes a shut-in. He's only got 10% of ownership of talking time when he's in a room with Fyodor at the same time. But also, when we talk about him being a very complex character, did you know that his name, Stavrogin, Stavros is a Greek word for cross. Martyr.
Bearing the cross.
Gene is Russian for horns. So he's both good and evil, to the Zimbardo talk that we talked about in part 1, where people have the capacity for both. We have the choice for both. And the positions we're putting, the barrel, that bad barrel that we're put in, all of these come down to these personal choices that we have to, whether we're following God's law, whether we're following what we think are universal moralistic standards of what's right and wrong and what's abuse of others. We all make a choice, and that choice results in actions. What's governing our choices is perhaps our consciousness and these different laws that we have around us. And when Stavrogin realizes he can't write his own, I think that's his downfall and hits his breaking point, when he realizes he can't just be the master-slave mentality, the master mentality that he really wanted from a Nietzsche perspective.
Yeah. I guess we haven't really talked a lot about, his moral consciousness and how he went through this, and how he would able to allow himself, I guess, quote, to fall that far. But it's interesting how he wanted those morals to be pushed, and that he went to the negative view of it. He could have tried to push morals in a positive light, and he felt like it, and I think this happens to a lot of people, is the negative is easier. To do harm is easier than to do good, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. What you're starting to see is we're having this really long discussion that started in the previous chapters and sections of this, where we started to talk about what makes something right or wrong in that mask. And we even started the discussion of what allows someone to change their mind, right? So we're starting to see the complexity that Dostoevsky wrote into this novel, that let's say he no longer believes in what he used to believe in, and he decides to change his mind. He becomes the Ivan Ivanov of, I no longer stand for this. And we see the complex web of even the choices that you made on a personal level that you no longer agree with can be your own prison in your own mind.
Well, hopefully we get some self-sacrifice, because I mean, and even then, I don't know if he is redeemable. We shall see.
Yeah, well, and that's going to be something that I've saved for our last part, is that idea of redemption, salvation. Those have very specific meanings of what does it mean to be saved? What does it mean to be redeemed? And we're going to go into that in this next part.
And how, right?
Yeah.
And how.
Yeah, but I think we've obviously made the case that this clearly has a lot of elements of the tragedy. So if you're asking about catharsis, for those of you that have already finished this book and are kind of listening, don't spoil it for people in the comments. But think about that. What's the catharsis for this? What's the peripeteia in terms of the sudden reversal of fortunes for Stavrogin? And I won't give away what happens at the end, but what does that mean in terms of how we feel as a reader, of what made us feel good or justified for Stavrogin's actions, in terms of what Fyodor's doing? There's a lot of discussion to happen here. We hope to see you in part 3, where we can actually reveal what happens in the discussion. I hope you guys are having a great time doing this. Playlist down below to follow along for part 3. Again, appreciate your time. My name's Una.
Peace.